Hey there, this is Professor Who talking to you today about the introducing fractions and what a fraction is, especially compared to a whole number. So if you're new to fractions, this may be the tutorial for you to help you understand really what a fraction means. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this number line that I've created. If you haven't seen a number line before, you might want to go back and check out a tutorial on number line, but this represents 0. This represents one whole number, 2 whole numbers, and 3 whole numbers. Just your basic counting. So I'm going to start here at the 0. 0 indicates nothing. You have nothing. So we'll scoot down to 1. And in this case, 1 represents one whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a Minecraft block. And here we have a stone block. One whole stone block representing 1 on our number line. So if I were to move to a whole number of 2, I'm actually going to lay down 2 whole stone blocks. 1 and 2. Maybe I'll stack it on top of each other. There we go. 1 and 2, representing 2 on the number line. If we go down to 3 on our number line, it's going to be represented by 3 whole blocks. 1, 2, and 3. So you can kind of see the difference between our blocks here. 1 whole block on the 1, 2 whole blocks on the 2, 3 whole blocks on the 3 there, none on 0. So those are whole numbers, but where do fractions come in? Fractions actually come in on the number line as well, but the difference is fractions will come in between the whole numbers. Now you notice how there's this big gap between 0 and 1, and between 1 and 2, and between 2 and 3. Between every whole number, there's a gap. And in between that gap, there are an infinite amount of smaller numbers. And those numbers are fractions, or parts of a whole. So imagine that you did not have one whole thing. In this case, we don't have one whole stone block. We can still represent that. Maybe we have part of the block. And so we represent it with a half slab. You notice how this is not a full block, like over here. This is one whole block. This, no, not so much. In fact, it's exactly half of a block. It's the bottom half of a stone block. So what happens in our number line is that we have fractions to represent all of those little parts in between our whole numbers. So I don't have nothing like empty hands. I have part of a block here. I have half of a block. And I don't have quite a full block. I only have half of it. So it has to fall somewhere between 0 and 1. It's part of a whole. But here's the thing. There are more numbers than just 1/2 in between a whole number. So 1/2 is just one of many fractions. Like I said, there's an infinite amount, meaning it's never ending in between. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. You can make numbers smaller and smaller. It just depends on how small the pieces that you cut up in between. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you, let's go here, outside of the game, and we're going to take a look at some candy. The famous Kit Kat. So if you take a look at a Kit Kat, when you buy a regular Kit Kat, you get 4 pieces that makes up one whole Kit Kat. So this right here is one whole Kit Kat unwrapped. And if you have 2 whole Kit Kats, it would look like this here. 2 whole Kit Kats. 1 whole Kit Kat here. 2 whole Kit Kats there. I'm going to delete the other one, so we're just working with 1 whole Kit Kat. But you notice what's interesting about some candy bars is that some candy bars are actually broken into pieces, so you can eat a piece at a time. And this is what fractions are. Fractions are those pieces that make up the whole thing. So here you have a whole Kit Kat, and I'll draw a line there to show this. So this right here is the whole Kit Kat. But you can take a part of it and just eat a part of it. Just like with anything, if you just eat a part of it, that's a fraction. It's a part of the whole thing. So in this case, you have one part of the Kit Kat that you've eaten. Okay, and I'm going to exit out to show you have eaten that. It's gone. But you still have 3 parts left. So in basic math, it would look like this. 4 minus 1, where you had 4 total to make up the whole thing, and you ate one of them. So fractions are parts of a whole. To give you another example in Minecraft, I'm going to take you over here to a little pen that I made. Imagine that you have this pen here, and it can hold, let's say, 20 chickens. Currently you have no chickens in there, so the whole thing can hold 20. 20 represents the whole that you can put in there, but we don't have any in there, so we have 0 out of 20 in here. But I can start adding parts to build up to fill up the whole thing. So if I wanted to, let's go find some chicken eggs. We've got a chicken egg here, help us spawn some chickens. So if I wanted to, I could start adding some chickens to that to fill up the whole thing. There's a chicken. One chicken. But that's 1 out of the 20 that I could fill this thing up with. The 20 represents what the whole thing is, but 1 chicken out of the 20 is in there. So I'll add another one. There's 2 out of 20, 3 out of 20, 4 out of 20, 5 out of 20 spots have now been filled in here. I could keep going. 6, 7, 8, 9, all out of 20, 10. Now I'm halfway there because I have 10 out of 20. Remember, the 20 represents the whole pen that I could fill up. In this case, I have 10 filling it up. So what are fractions? Fractions are the parts of a whole in between a whole number. Parts of a whole means you don't quite have a full set, you have a part of it. In this case, we have our 1 block, but here we have half of it, so it has to fall in between. So in a number line, there are many different parts in between the whole numbers, and that goes on and on and on. That goes between every whole number, not just between 2 and 3, not just between 1 and 2, not just between 0 and 1. And as it was shown with the Kit Kat, Kit Kats are one whole Kit Kat is made up of 4 parts. So if you have one of those parts, that's 1 out of 4. That's a fraction. You're just dealing with a part of it. So if you give your friend a part of it, that's a fraction. If you give your friend the whole thing, they have all 4 parts. In this case, this chicken coop can hold 20 chickens, but I've only put in part of the whole. I've only put in 10. So what are fractions? Fractions are parts of a whole. So I think it's important not to only understand that fractions are parts of a whole, but really understand that that goes with anytime that you split something up and you take parts from that thing, it is now a fraction because you've created parts of a whole. When you look at all the parts together that build and make one whole thing, it's parts of a whole. If you think about all the Pokemon cards there are to make maybe to make a full playing deck, but you only have some of the cards and you don't have enough to make a whole deck. That's parts of a whole. If you take a pizza and you cut it up, that's parts of a whole. You take your math book and you rip it to shreds. All those little shreds are parts that make up the whole math book. So if we look at this cake here, this nice pristine cake we have, you see that it hasn't been cut up yet. It represents one full beautiful cake. So what we're going to do is we are going to split it up and look at it as a fraction. Now on a number line, this would be at the 1, kind of like how we had 1 block represented at the 1 on the number line. But here, if I were to split this, I'm going to try to split it as best as I can. Just imagine those are knife cuts cutting through the cake. And if I were to look at just one part of this, if I were to look just at this section right here, okay, and that was a horrible highlighting job. Let's use something better. Maybe I'll just point it out. If I were to look at this point right here, this section right here, that represents one part of the whole cake. The whole cake needs 4 parts. See that? Here's 1 part, 2 part, 3, and 4. But I'm just focusing on this part right here. Each one of these are parts of the whole. So on a number line, this would show 1 out of the 4 if I looked at both of these together, it would show 2 out of the 4, or half of the cake. When you look at the cake all together and all the parts are back together, then it's one whole cake, and it would be 1 on the number line. But if you ignore part of it, and you just look at parts of it, I'm going to cross this out to show that, kind of like the Kit Kat that we looked at earlier. Now you have just 3 full pieces left from the cake that needed 4 total pieces. So, do we have a full cake anymore? No, this part's gone. So now we just have parts of the cake. So if you think about that, what we've done is we've taken one whole and we've done an operation to it. And the operation that we've done when you split something up, when you cut it up, is that you've just divided it up. So not only are fractions parts of a whole, but they require that division happens to create the parts. So division and fractions are the same. They're related. They are, that's what fractions are. They're dividing things into pieces. So not only are they parts of a whole, but they are division problems as well. So 2 takeaways from this introduction to fractions. You should be able now to identify what fractions are, to define it, to say that they are parts of a whole, and also show that they are related to division. Fractions are parts of a whole, and they are division.